It is my distinct and distinguished pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker today. Dr.Manuel Pastor is a professor at the University of Southern California, a professor of American Studies and Ethnicity. He's the director of USC's Program for Environmental and Regional Equity and co-director of USC's Center for the Study of Immigrant Integration. He is a professor, an author, a researcher, a speaker, and a Californian. He's well known throughout the country and has provided countless communities the analysis, the facts, the reality about why some of their communities have more opportunity than others, and ties those realities to public policy so we can put our hand on the handle and start to do the work that changes things in folks' lives. I'd like to give him another title. He is the people's professor. Yeah? He's the people's professor because he helps the people understand what's happening to them so they can do something about it. He's the people's professor. A lot of professors do work for defense industry or for corporate America. His work is committed to improving the lives of human beings. And for that, we are most thankful to Dr. Manuel Pastor. Please speak to us, sir.
See, I think I need both these. Okay, great. So, gosh, thanks for that really generous introduction. And I will bring it back and see whether or not being people's professor leads to a raise at the University of Southern California. And I also there was a great introduction when they said, how did you want to be introduced? I said, just say that I've been married for 31 years. My wife and I, what we say is we've been married for 31 years, many of them happily. So many of you know about that. And it's both the good times and the tough times that sometimes get us through things. And that's a little bit about what the world is like in terms of transportation, housing, what we're going to be talking about today. There's sometimes good times, there's sometimes tough times, and these are tough times that we need to be dealing with. So really glad to be here. Just two more quick comments. I note that you have Move San Diego here, you have Walk San Diego here. I think later in the day, Dance San Diego is coming, and it's really just the whole San Diego will be hip-hopping. And some of you who know me also, while I speak for the next 20 or so minutes, my voice might break a little bit. Some of you who know me know that I have a speech disorder that actually gets treated once a month. Gets treated once a month with Botox, because that's how we treat everything in Los Angeles. So, and it's working. So I want to talk to you a little bit today about three big kind of changes that are happening in the world, and then how that kind of comes down in terms of thinking about these issues of transportation and transit equity, and in particular SB 375, the bill that came out of our state Senate that has really turned things around in terms of at least what's supposed to happen with regard to new kinds of planning that'll bring transportation and land use decisions closer together. And then I'll end on what it is that you can and should be perhaps thinking about doing about making sure that your interests get represented in this. But let me start with this big picture about sort of three big kinds of changes that are going on that set the context for why we're thinking about quote-unquote sustainability at all, why we're thinking about how this transportation stuff relates to jobs and housing, why we're thinking about why engagement is an important part of getting your voice out. And those three big changes have to do with changes in our demography in the country, our economy in the country, and also our relationship to the environment. So I want to talk mostly about those things and then kind of drill it down. So on the demography, we have a rapidly changing demographic character in the country. It's now well known that by the year 2043, that the United States will be a so-called majority-minority nation. In the last census, the two groups that had the most rapid population growth were Latinos and Asians. Both grew over the past decade at a rate of about 43%. African Americans grew by about 11%, non-Hispanic whites by only 1%. So huge differences in terms of the demographic changes. And one key thing to know about that is the following. When you hear those very high growth rates, particularly for Latinos, what do most people think is driving that? Immigration, and that is wrong. Because immigration has actually slowed down into the country. Immigration is now, Asians coming into the country are bigger than, they have taller Asians, no. The number of Asians coming into the country is larger than the number of Latin Americans coming into the country. Net migration from Mexico is 0, and net undocumented immigration is negative. People returning to Mexico, not coming. So this is very different than what most people think is going on, and it actually has huge impacts, because what it means is that the population that's growing is actually a homegrown population. The kids of these immigrants and the kids of these populations. So one of the reasons, for example, why immigration reform is sort of queuing up right now as a national issue has a little bit to do with the politics, but it's also simply got to do with the population changes. That is, that we don't really have as much immigration coming into the country, and what we're trying to do is to figure out what we do with the population that we currently have here. Now, there's a couple of other things about that demographic change going on. First thing to realize is often when people hear that this demographic change is going on, that the country is becoming more diverse, essentially what they think is that must be going on in just a couple places, right? So that basically, like Los Angeles is about to become 150% minority, right? And that's how that, so it's happening just in a few places. But as you know, it's happening all over California. It's happening in San Diego. It's happening in the Central Valley, and it's happening all over the country. So it's not something constrained to particular places. And one of the key things that's going on is it's happening in our suburbs. It is the suburbs of America that are actually becoming more diverse more rapidly than the central cities, because the central cities kind of got to wherever they're going to get in the first place. Here's a really interesting fact for you. Of the 100 largest metropolitan areas in the United States, places like Baltimore and Denver and Atlanta and Phoenix, etc. Of the 100 largest metro areas in the United States, what do you think is the one metropolitan area that did not see an increase in the number of Hispanic children in the last decade? You're right, Los Angeles. That is not most people's thought, right? Why? Because the Latino population in Los Angeles is much more settled, right? It's becoming, people are having fewer children. The white people who are going to move out, they already moved out, right? So the other ones are staying there. Young people are moving back, right? Etc. So the number of Hispanic children did not increase. It is the suburbs, right? It's the places like North County, right? Which are becoming more diverse, right? And actually, it's also the suburbs in the United States that are seeing the single largest increase in the concentration of poverty. So poverty rates are rising in the suburbs, the demographics are changing, and when people tend to think about things like transportation fairness, they've traditionally thought about that with regard to central cities. They haven't thought about that with regard to places that are like North County. They haven't thought about it with regard to places that are like Riverside or San Bernardino. They haven't thought about it with regard to our suburbs. So, much more diverse country. That diversity is occurring very significantly in our suburbs. And the other really important thing to know about this big kind of changing demography is what it means in terms of the age structure of our population. So most people fixate on the 43% growth rate of Latinos, which I mentioned, or they fixate on the way in which we're going to become a minority country. By 2035, we'll be a majority Latino state, actually, California. People will have to say California the right way. Right? San Diego will roll off your lips with much more pizzazz or picante, no sé. But what most people don't look at, that to me the most startling fact from the statistic is from the census is the following. The median age, half older, half younger, For non-Hispanic whites in the country, 42 years. And in California, it's 44. The median age for Asian Pacific Islanders, 35. The median age for African Americans, 32. The median age for Latinos, 27. So 42 or 44, let's take 44, that's California, to 27, that's 17 years, right? That is a generation gap, right? It's a huge generation gap which has significant consequences. Now, it has two kinds of consequences. One is that when you're 27, you're in prime family formation age. When you're 44, you think you're in prime family formation age, right? But it's really just a midlife crisis, get over it, you know. So no, I mean, people form families at 44 and stuff too. But what it means is it helps to explain where demographic change is coming from, but also where our political disconnect is coming from. Because it's an older generation not necessarily seeing itself in a younger generation. And why that's important is because if you think that we are going to solve our problems without reconnecting those generations, you're wrong. We need to figure out how to connect the old and the young. We need to figure out how to cross the boundaries of boundaries of generations as well as geographies, and through that, use that as a way to communicate across race as well. So, big demographic changes coming on the country. They are about the increased diversity of the country, the changing suburbs, and the need to look at the age structure. Big changes coming in terms of the economy. What you find is that over the last 10 to 15 years in particular, but really it's a much longer term thing, we've had a jobs crisis, an inability to generate the jobs that we need to be able to move the economy forward. And it's not just the recent recession. We had pretty dismal jobs performance through the decade before the recession. And we've also, and looking forward, you know, the really optimistic economists are saying that we're going to get down around 7% unemployment in 2 years. Woohoo, right? So we're leaving a lot of people behind. And the other part of that has been a real change in the wage structure in the United States as well. So it's not simply that we weren't generating enough jobs, it's that we were generating a lot of bad jobs. And there's a great example of this. Now, some of you have done that horrible thing of driving up to Los Angeles, right? On Highway 5, right? He's shaking his head no, right? You just take the train. That's how I came down today. It's a good idea. You just don't go up there? Dude, that's where I live, man. Like they say, don't be a hater. When you drive up there, and as soon as you leave Orange County, and then all of a sudden the freeway gets narrow again, and it's old, and you start going at 2 miles an hour, and you're like looking around, and you get to know the territory pretty well, right? Well, you know that place on the right-hand side as you hit around Atlantic Boulevard, the Citadel? Yeah. Right? What did that used to be? It was a tire factory, right? And what is it now? Mall. It's a shopping center. It's not even a mall. It's for an outlet center, right? So it's actually sort of the really cheaper stuff, right, moving out, right? Well, here's an interesting thing. It used to be a tire factory. Now it's a outlet center. There's more jobs there now than there were in the tire factory. But what's true about those jobs? They're terrible, right? I mean, they're low-wage jobs, part-time, no health insurance, right? And that's been characteristic of the economy and what it's been generating for the last 15 to 20 years. It's been generating a bifurcated, that's a fancy word, two poles. I would say bipolar, but some of us have that, right? So it's generating a bifurcated structure, right, in which you've got really high-end jobs on the one hand, low-end jobs on the other, and that's been extraordinarily characteristic of the U.S. economy in general, and in particular places like San Diego and the Silicon Valley, places that have coupled high-tech jobs with lots of low-end jobs as well. And one of the things we don't realize is, when people hear about high-end jobs and low-end jobs, they think that they're somehow on different tracks. They're actually generally part of the same economy. Because behind every software engineer or biotech manager is an army of nannies and gardeners and food service workers, etc. And in our high-tech areas, places like Austin and Boston and the Silicon Valley and here, is where you find concentrations of undocumented workers doing the work, right? That is all the service work that's actually also part of high tech, right? So we've been generating not enough jobs. The jobs we've been generating have not been of high quality. And we are in the midst of trying to now think about and deal with the sort of inequality that's resulted as part of that. So big economic changes. And then the final big set of changes, as if that wasn't enough as a set of challenges to face, right, is the environment, right? Now, when I talk about the environment, what I often do is I start by doing the following. You know, when I was young and went to college, and some of you may have done this when you were in college too, there were occasionally nights of excess. And I recall after one night that was rather excessive, that myself and a few friends went out to breakfast the next day. I don't think we'd actually been to bed yet. We went to the breakfast, and one guy ordered eggs and sausage and pancakes and all this food. And someone, like the waitress, came up and said, you know, that's like, she's supposed to sell it to us. She's like, you know, that's going to kill you eating all that, right? And he said, you know, sometimes you have to show your system who's boss. So our relationship to the environment has been trying to show the environment who's boss, right? Our relationship to the environment has been a commanding rather than an embracing presence, right? We have tried to reshape the environment to serve us rather than figure out how we act and live in relationship to the environment. And what has resulted from that is climate change, right? What has resulted from that is global warming, because rather than figuring out the rhythms of the planet, we've tried to make the planet ours. We've tried to command it to its presence. And we are getting a wake-up call. We're getting a wake-up call, early wake-up call with Katrina, which revealed the cleavages of race, but also the vulnerability to climate disasters. And we've got a wake-up call with Superstorm Sandy. How many of you saw the Business Week cover that came out the week after Superstorm Sandy? It was a picture of New York underwater, and it said Business Week, which is a leading left-wing journal. Its headline was, "It's global warming, stupid," right? So we have to figure out what we can do about this relationship to the environment and what we're going to do about climate change in particular. And there are two other aspects of this which I think are really important to be thinking about, and they tie back in to the stuff I was talking about before. So I guess it's three, really. One is when Business Week says it's global warming stupid, that means business realizes, the economy is realizing that it's not economics against the environment any longer. It's trying to figure out how to bring the two things together. And we need to be thinking about how do we use the strategies we need to develop to protect the environment to generate the employment we need for the future. The second thing, which is really interesting, and people don't get this, but who do you think in California, ethnically, are the most loyal environmental voters? People who will vote for almost every environmental measure in the biggest margins. It's Latinos, right? When you look at the polling, what most people think is that if you imagine an environmentalist, right, they just came out of Whole Foods, right? They've got several bags of granola, right? They are themselves, raised free, they're cage free, right? And they're white, right? I mean, that's our imagination, right? They're white and they're wearing Birkenstocks, right? And that's, that is an image, right? But when you look at the polling data, this Latino guy's wearing Birkenstocks, is that dude. See, that's what you like about San Diego. It's very cross-cultural, so. Or as we say in Spanish, los Birkenstocks, por favor. So when you look at the polling data, right, it's actually whites that tend to vote less. When you ask the question, are you concerned about climate change? Latinos outscore whites. Latinos, Asians, and African Americans all outscore whites. Do you think that the state is doing enough? Latinos say no, whites say yes, right? So, and that's in the state of California where we actually, so one of the things that's changed is that a lot of environmental groups are realizing that there are some natural bridges to be built between communities to new constituencies that are really engaged around these issues. And then the final thing that that means is that it helps to broaden our definition of the environment. Because the environment is not something out there. It is not a set of trees that we go visit at some point. It is not an ocean that we want to protect and look at from afar. The environment are the parks, whether or not there's open space in our communities, whether or not there's healthy food nearby, whether or not there are transportation choices that we can take advantage of. The environment is where we live, work, and play, and it's not something simply that's set aside in a national forest. It's something that's an integral part of what we do. You have a great group here in San Diego that does work on the canyons, right? And it's helped people to understand the relationship with wild nature right in their own communities. So you get a chance to do this, but this is an important development that's happening as well. So all of this demographic change, this economic change, this environmental change, means that there's a lot of renewed interest in what's called sustainability, right? And part of that sustainability has been this passage of the law, SB 375. SB 375 is a law that came out of California, Senate, and what it does is essentially mandate that the vehicle miles traveled needs to be reduced in order to take some of the pressure off global warming. And it mandates that that happen in a very interesting way. What was called the Regional Targets Advisory Committee for SB 375, which was trying to set the targets for how much the vehicle miles would be reduced. And being on that, it always reminded me, there's a great story about W.C. Fields. Now, some of you may know that W.C. Fields was pretty well known for drinking, for womanizing, for just being a real partier, right? And toward the end of his life, when he was lying on his bed and pretty near death, someone came up to visit him, and they saw W.C. Fields reading the Bible, which I believe the Reverend would like to know. And they looked at him, though, because it seemed kind of odd. And they said, "Bill, what are you doing reading the Bible?" And he said, "Looking for loopholes." So some of what I saw happen on the Regional Target Advisory Committee was looking for loopholes, right? I mean, when you are reducing vehicle miles traveled and it's about putting together land use and transportation, that means you got to make some tough decisions, right? You got to make sure that you got transit that's going to places where people live and work, right? It means that you got to make choices to get people out of their cars, right? It means you got to make sure that there's real fairness that's involved in this, right? Because sustainability is not just about the environment, it's about a sustainable economy and a sustainable demography as well. So a sustainable economy, are we doing this with an eye toward job creation and job opportunities? And a sustainable demography, are we doing this with an eye toward inclusion so that everybody can benefit from what we do around sustainability? And that means the need to really think through some of the sort of tough choices that are ahead, particularly with regard to transit. Now, let me just say a couple of things about this, and then kind of I'll bring it to a emotional close. So it'll be really thrilling, I assure you. So in terms of thinking about these issues moving forward, so when we think about sustainability, it's about the environment, but it's, as I said, also about the economy, and are we taking advantage of our transit investments to be able to generate jobs that we need here, and in particular, high-quality jobs. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So I just heard that you've got a rail line here, Sprinter, that just got shut down?
Yeah.
And it got shut down because the brake system's no good? And it shut down for a bunch of months because they built it in Europe, and so they've got to get a European person to come out here and look at the brakes, and then go back to Europe and redo the brakes, then bring them back out? Wow. Imagine if that had been built in San Diego. Right? Imagine if there was a rail car industry that could service the vast expansion of the transit lines that's going on in Los Angeles and could help you here as well. Imagine if that was local and we actually just had somebody where we were generating jobs, and we were generating jobs in terms of repair, right? So imagine the jobs we can generate. So when we think about the environment and what we're doing around this, we have to be thinking about the jobs we can create. If you start doing more transit-oriented development, are you generating jobs for local residents through doing that? Are you making sure that people are not being displaced by transit-oriented development? Are you creating opportunities that can get people to work, thinking about sustainability in terms of employment? And thinking about sustainability in terms of our changing demography and making things that work for everyone. So I want to say to you, my own little editorial plug, as though I wasn't already opinionated, right? Is that an important part of sustainability, particularly right now, is comprehensive immigration reform. We need to make sure, thank you, we need to make sure that we don't have so many people living in the shadows. We need, particularly in the light of the fact that we're not going to have immigration flows at the level that we've had in the past into the country, it means that everybody here has to be as productive and efficient as possible. And you know what people think about when they think about those 11 million undocumented people is what they forget. We just did this for Los Angeles. Los Angeles has 900,000 people who are undocumented, about 90,000 young people who are undocumented. But more than that, there's about 500,000 kids who have at least one undocumented parent. 85% of those kids were born in the United States, right? So if we want those kids to do well, so that as we get older, someone can pay for our Social Security, we've got to make sure that there's good opportunities for them. Comprehensive immigration reform will be part of that. Education will be part of that. Doing better work on transit will be part of that as well. So let me say what I think stands in the way of doing this and then kind of come to a conclusion. So there's actually, you're going to spend, I think, most of the day thinking about issues and policies, and I just want to say to you that that's really important, and that there's no shortage of policy solutions. You can solve these things, right? You can think about better transit systems. You can think about better transit-oriented development. You can think about how to encourage multimodal transit, right? So that people can walk and bike and dance on the way to the train or a bus. Buses are really important, particularly to places spread out as San Diego County. You can think about job creation policies. You can think about better planning systems, etc. What stands in the way is not policy, but politics. And what will change the politics is power. And that's what you need to be thinking about. So why does politics stand in the way? We live in a very fragmented society politically. You know, people wind up listening. There's some great statistics on how popular Congress is. Apparently, rabies is more popular than Congress. And anybody who's had rabies knows, yeah, that's probably better than Congress. But we live in a very fragmented society. We live in one in which some people listen to the stream of news on Fox, and some people listen to the stream of news on MSNBC, and we live in worlds where we don't talk and we don't communicate, and we live in very different kind of strands. And dealing with that is really critical. Just this last couple of years, we did research for a book that just came out. I'm surprised you didn't buy copies for everybody here. But I know the good Reverend will, so just ask him afterwards. And this book is called Just Growth, Inclusion and Prosperity in America's Metropolitan Regions. It's a good book, available at Amazon.com. It says Greg Knows, soon to be made into a major motion picture. I was really excited. We just finished negotiating the movie rights, and I was going to be portrayed by Antonio Banderas. Turns out it's George Lopez, but still it'll be good. So Just Growth asked the question, an inductive question, what are the places in America where economic growth and equity, inclusion, are coming together? So rather than sort of choosing our favorite examples, we did a data exercise looking at 200 metropolitan areas in the United States between 1980 and 2000. And then we chose the ones that seemed to show up well. And, oh, good, because it's much better with pictures. So, we chose the ones that seemed to be doing well, and then we went and investigated those places, right? Now, I'm an economist by training. That's not what economists do. Usually we just theorize, right? It's a great expression someone said. They said, well, that's fine in practice, but how does it work in theory? So we decided to just go out and find out what was going on in these areas. And they were weird areas. I mean, there was like Jacksonville, Florida, and Nashville, and places where Columbus, Ohio, right? We chose places consciously that most people hadn't gone to. And what we found out was something really interesting. It had a fancy academic name, epistemic community. Terrible. It means epistemology is what you know, community is who you know it with. And the easier way to remember this, knowing together is growing together. What we found out is that where people created institutions to bring people together across the lines of business, labor, and community, across the lines of city and suburb, across different ethnic groups, they arrived at a common understanding of the problems, even if they wound up differing and having political fights about the solutions, right? But having a kind of principled fight about what a solution should be is very different than having a fragmented knowledge base in which you don't even agree that there's a problem, or where you don't see that you actually need to deal with climate change, or you don't see that we've got a problem with the quality of employment, or you don't see that your neighbor's fate is key to your own fate, where you don't see that North County, isn't that place? North San Diego, it's all white, they've got no problems, right? They're completely disconnected from the world, right? But they do have Oceanside. The knowing together is the basis for growing together, right? So this knowledge base is very important. What I want to suggest to you is that we've got real political disconnection, generational disconnection, economic disconnection, and environmental disconnection, and the solution is figuring out how to know together, how to organize together, and how to win together. So let me just say something about the last couple pieces and then close. I already talked about knowing together, getting a knowledge base that people share, and part of what's going to happen today is that you're going to get, some of you are coming in here and you already know a lot. Some of you are coming in, you want to know more. Some of you may be coming in and you know too much, right? People will say, could you please be quiet? But part of this is knowing so that you develop a common knowledge base. But part of it is then, once you have that knowledge base, organizing. Organizing to bring people together to do something about the problems that you see. And organizing is about building relationship. It's about understanding what people's needs are. Today, if you would, make sure you meet somebody new. And make sure you meet somebody from an orbit that you don't usually occupy. If you're from Walk LA, talk to someone from Walk San Diego, talk to someone from Car San Diego. If you are in a institution that's mostly a white institution, reach out to some of the Latinos and others who are in the group here. If you're a person whose main interest is the environment, reach out to someone whose main interest is jobs and equity. If you're someone who's more policy or politics, reach out to somebody who's more faith and organizing. Reach out, organize relationally, because that's how you will do the last part, which is winning. Because one of the things that we often like to do in our societies, we learn about a problem and then we might organize together around a problem. But the really key thing is to actually fix the problem. And to do that, you need to win. And to do that, you cannot be scared of power. One of the things we do is that we associate power with really demonic things, right? Because when you think power, I mean, the first thing that comes up is a politician far removed from people, exercising kind of, power behind the scenes and, doing things in a Machiavellian kind of way, an evil sort of way. That's often the way we think about power. But power is about strength. Power is about resilience. Power is about community expressing itself and community being able to get what it needs in terms of things moving forward. Do not be scared of your own power. In fact, cultivate your own power, because if you take that power and you organize it and you've got a good knowledge base, you can change things and make the world a better place. And when you do that, and I'll just end with this, you need to be thinking constantly about this sort of new vision of power, this new vision of who we will be as a nation, and the new vision of how we should be organizing together. So you need to think about a new kind of leadership. And when I think about a new kind of leadership, I'm always reminded of a story that was told to me. I used to, when I was up at UC Santa Cruz, run a thing called the Summer Institute, Social Change Across Borders, where we brought together organizers from Latin America and Latino communities in the United States to figure out what their common interests were. And we were doing this about a decade ago before this had become more common. And at the end of one of those week-long training sessions, an organizer, Victor Quintana, from Sinaloa, Mexico, he organized campesinos or farm workers, said, there's only two kind of leaders in this world. Leaders who like the game of chess and leaders who like the jigsaw puzzle. And like you, we were looking at him, what are you talking about? And he said, in chess, there's only two colors, usually black or white. In the jigsaw puzzle, there are many different colors, and indeed a single piece can be multi-hued. In chess, some pieces are far more powerful than others. You are really bummed out when you lose your queen. Particularly like to a pawn, right? That's just like an awful feeling. In the jigsaw puzzle, every piece is important. Because how many of you have been frustrated when you get to the end of a jigsaw puzzle and like one piece is missing, right? And you start screaming at your kids, what did you do with this, right? Every piece is important. In chess, you make progress by literally knocking someone down and off their territory. And in the jigsaw puzzle, you make progress by fitting the pieces together so seamlessly that you don't know where one ends and another begins. And in chess, the object is to win. In the jigsaw puzzle, the object is to complete the tapestry. We've been playing too much chess and not enough jigsaw puzzle. We've been, as a nation, dividing ourselves by race and geography and generation. We haven't been figuring out how all the pieces fit together. And the pieces fit together and can fit together in San Diego County. That is your charge for today. It's deeper than transit. It's deeper than housing. It's about connecting communities together. Because if you do that, the rest of the policy piece, you'll need some help, but it will fall in place. Thank you.